Okay. I'll wait for them to have a seat.
Motion language, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
can we print it out right now?
It's printed, yeah.
Okay, we're ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good morning. The Committee on Insurance and Financial Services shall come to order. Mr. Clerk, could you please do a roll call so we can establish a quorum?
Representatives Carter,
Present.
McFall, Coleman. Here. Stone.
Here.
Breen.
Present.
Rogers.
Here.
Scott.
Here.
Young.
Here.
Fitzgerald. Grant. Harris.
Here.
Markkinen. Bazat.
Here.
Aragona. Bruck. Nyer.
Here.
Smith.
Present.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Now we need a motion to adopt the minutes of October 19th, 2023 as printed. Minority Vice Chair Harris moves to adopt the minutes. Seeing no objections, the minutes are adopted as printed. As a former healthcare provider, I understand the needs of the healthcare industry. However, I knew very, very little about the nuances of the insurance industry. I realized that to protect all Michiganders, the solution had to be narrow and inclusive. I took time to learn about the insurance industry with the goal of making sure we take care of all of our long-term care and our TBIs, every single one of them, without pricing any Michigander out in the market. Last week, we had a great presentation from CPAN, who's from the provider industry. Now, my colleagues and I will listen to a presentation from Eric Poe, Chief Executive Officer of Cure Auto Insurance. Mr. Poe will share his perspective about auto no fault with this committee. Cure has been able to find a niche in the market, particularly in Detroit. Mr. Poe, thank you for coming. Please come forward. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and committee members for your time this morning. My name is Eric Poe. I'm the CEO of Cure Auto Insurance. Well, hopefully start off with this picture of me. I'll first start by saying Cure Auto Insurance now currently insures over 100,000 drivers in the state of Michigan. We do business in 3 states. We've been in business for over 32 years, and we insure over 70,000 Detroit residents. As you can tell from the picture and from me in front of you, this is what my daughters would call a catfish picture of myself. But the whole point is that I'm hoping, in short, to bestow some knowledge that we have as no-fault specialists. We insure 150,000 vehicles in only states that do no-fault insurance. Ultimately, what I'm hoping to achieve today is to provide this committee the background and knowledge to make an educated decision when thinking about tinkering with any legislation dealing with no fault in this state. Because as you know, from other states, at least I can tell you from where I've testified, car insurance is usually not this big of an issue. You raise rates by 10%, 20% in other states, you're not necessarily going to make a material difference in somebody's lives. But in the state of Michigan, where you have the highest cost for car insurance in this country, 10 or 20% can mean the difference between whether or not somebody can afford to own a car, whether therefore they can actually have access to a job other than public transportation. And I know how cold it is here in Michigan, and if you have to go to a bike route, that really limits your possibilities of having a job. So my ultimate purpose of today is to answer 3 fundamental questions for this committee. Number 1, why is car insurance so expensive in the state of Michigan? Number two, are catastrophically injured people in this state being left out in the dark with some loophole? And number three, what is the best solution for this legislature to address any loopholes that currently exist? In order to do that, I first wanted to provide an outline of what I achieved today by presenting these subjects. Number one, to give you a history of no fault in the United States of America. Because what I've learned over the last few years of being in this state is that people don't understand how different Michigan is from the rest of the country. And to understand that, you really need to know the history of how no fault was created and why there's only 14 states in the country that have it. Secondly, provide some ongoing misconceptions about no-fault insurance and give areas of abuse that currently exist in the system. Talk about who actually bears the cost, because oftentimes I also hear in the committee meetings people talk about what the average rate's going to be for the average policy in the state of Michigan. But people don't understand that there are many factors that go into the rates. So the average is not a straight line average. So while you might have car insurance go up by $100 per policy, that's not necessarily going to be the impact for somebody that lives in an urban area or somebody that has a sub 700 credit score in the state of Michigan. And then finally, what we think are proposed solutions for existing problems that are in this no-fault system. So it's an interesting background in terms of the history of no-fault. Back in the 50s and 60s, when people first started having the affordability of owning a car, they were given options to go to their DMV and either post a bond or buy car insurance. And people were getting in car accidents in the 60s, and people weren't buying car insurance, and they weren't posting bonds with the DMV. So this is the first time that state legislators across this country started mandating car insurance for the first time. And in 1970, the state of Massachusetts had this big quandary. They wanted to answer this question. Well, what occurs to the hospitals and providers and doctors that treat accident victims while the two people that got in the car accident are disputing who's at fault? So they started their thoughts and they said, well, why don't we emulate what we do in workers' comp, create a no-fault system? Eventually, it'll all break even. So Massachusetts became the first state to ever pass no fault in this country. Well, what they did by doing that is they created car insurers to now expand their coverage to become pseudo health insurance carriers. Sounds great. We don't have a right to subrogate when somebody's in a car accident to go after the tortfeasor, meaning it doesn't matter who's at fault, whatever car you're in, that car insurer has to pay for the treatment and care of those injuries. Well, several assumptions were made when they came up with no fault. One of them was that providers, this is in 1970, right? This is when doctors would come to your house with a leather bag and a stethoscope, okay? There was never an assumption that there would ever be providers that would ever overtreat patients or overbill patients. That's one of the assumptions that was fundamental in no fault when they created this scheme. The second one was that the assumption was that car insurers would be similar to workers' comp carriers or health insurance carriers. One thing they didn't realize is that car insurers have no right to leverage what those actual rates were. Unlike your health insurer that can say, well, if you're not going to accept this rate, we're not going to give you any of our patients in network. Car insurers aren't able to do that. When you get in a car accident, we don't get to tell you where you're going to go get your treatment. So leveraging what those rates would be is something that was noticeably absent in the scheme. The end of the day, state legislators adopted where there was no fee schedule, like the state of Michigan and the state of New Jersey. They adopted this three-word legislative solution that all car insurers in those states, in New Jersey and in Michigan, would have to pay every provider that treats somebody the usual, customary, and reasonable rate. Which those words, if you've ever been a litigator, myself being a lawyer myself, the words usual, customary, and reasonable can be debated forever, which is what we have here in the state of Michigan. So ultimately, after 25 years of examining no-fault states, because there's only 14 states in this country that even adopted no-fault. So there are 36 states that don't have any no-fault at all. So when people talk about no-fault in Michigan, they make an assumption that every state in the country has no-fault. There's only 14 states that have no-fault. And what they did is a study after 25 years that the intention of no-fault to limit litigation, meaning lawsuits, right? And make quicker payments to providers. After 25 years, the largest study ever done said that those 14 states actually provide the highest amount of litigation and the longest payment terms for providers. It was the massive failure. So when we go to this background, the reason why it's important I put it in a timeline is because there's only 2 states in the country that have ever adopted unlimited no fault without a fee schedule. One of them is New Jersey, and 10 months later in 1973, the state of Michigan. So if you look at this timeline, in 1973, when New Jersey passed this law, we went, and I lived in New Jersey at that time, my parents did, we went through a tremendous amount of turmoil. By 1989, 45% of the cars in New Jersey were insured by a drunk driving pool run by the state of New Jersey. And that drunk driving pool cost the state of New Jersey $3 billion of a deficit. And that's when in 1990, they came up with a first reform law by going from unlimited to $250,000. Now over those course of those years in 1998 and 2003, we went through more reforms because there were more problems with no fault. But ultimately, the reason why I bring this timeline together is because Michigan never went through any reform law until 2019. And that's why this is a fact that'll probably shock most. But in the last 30 years, there's only been 2 states that have ever been the highest cost for car insurance in this country. One was New Jersey. We had that title for over 20 years. And Michigan. No other states have ever had that title, and shockingly, and should not be coincidentally, the reason why that is because what I'll show you in the next graph. In this table, you will see the 14 states that have no fault. And I think numbers don't lie. The left column indicates the maximum amount of no fault coverage you get with every one of those states. And as you'll see, Massachusetts is on this list, Pennsylvania is on this list, Florida's on this list, New York and New Jersey are on this list. We aren't talking about a list of people that live in Montana that may have more horses than cars, right? These are heavy populated states. And look at the numbers that we're talking about here. Massachusetts in 52 years has never increased its cap for no-fault insurance. We're sitting here debating as a legislature, is this enough coverage? We have the unlimited and largest amount of coverage for no fault in the United States by a long shot. What do we see as a result of having this tremendous amount of coverage? What you see in that column for average loss severity. This is what, in translation for lay people, is what whenever we pick up the phone and somebody says, hey, car insurance carrier, I'm treating with a doctor. If we open a claim, this is how much the average claim costs before we close it. As you can see from that column under 2022, the state of Michigan, the average claim cost is $47,000 and change. Looking at number 2, in New Jersey, where I live, that's $21,111. To say that New Jersey's number 2 is the highest, and putting this into perspective and looking at Michigan, is like saying, I ran the Boston Marathon and I finished in 2nd place in 4 hours and 30 minutes. But the guy from Kenya did it in 2 hours and 5 minutes. Okay, there's not even a close comparison from the state of Michigan to the number 2 in this country in terms of average claim severity. And when you look at incurred loss ratio, that next column, that column is to indicate to you as a layperson, what out of every dollar does the aggregate industry pay out of every dollar they collect? So for 2022, the incurred loss ratio for Michigan as an industry for car insurance pays $1.10 in just losses alone. So the notion that I hear often in testimony before the Senate, when I testified there earlier a couple weeks ago, is that car insurers are not transparent. We're making tons of money. Look at all the advertisements that are going on. What people don't understand is that the car insurance industry is 100% transparent because we're required to by law. We must file our financial statements every quarter. It's public. If you want to know what Geico makes, all you have to do is Google it. You want to find out anything about what carriers are making in any state, it is 100% required by law that we file quarterly financial statements that are over 72 pages long and are in 8-point font. If you ever want to spend a good weekend just looking at mind-numbing numbers, just look at the car insurance carrier's statutory financial statements. So as you can see from that right column, and I'm sorry if I'm going fast, if somebody wants to interrupt me, let me know, but I'm trying to translate this into layperson's terms. There's no doubt about it. Michigan is a dysfunctional market for car insurance. The cost for car insurance carriers is magnanimous. This is empirical data. This isn't something that somebody's making up. This is something that's verifiable publicly. And so where does Michigan rank? At the end of the day, a resounding first place. And as you can see from the correlation on the left column, There is a straight line correlation to what you provide as a car insurance state as the maximum amount of coverage compared to what those costs are being for the actual system. So often people ask me, well, Mr. Poe, I don't understand. How can Massachusetts have an $8,000 cap and we're sitting here talking about unlimited or $250? So what happens? What happens after that, and the other 36 other states that don't have no fault, is that those providers board those medical expenses, and ultimately the tortfeasor pays whatever the burden is of those costs. So it's not like, if we see Tom Brady win a few Super Bowls, I've never seen him say after he wins a Super Bowl, we need to address the no-fault problem. I've got an $8,000 cap in this state, right? I mean, this would be something that I would think he'd probably be talking about if everybody that was tragically injured in the state of Massachusetts was being just left out in the cold, right? Tom Brady would make a big issue about that. So where do we rank in terms of the cost of defending a claim? And this is important because in Michigan, we don't have an arbitration system. So in the state of New Jersey, what the legislature passed was they said, if you ever have to debate these costs and medical necessity, you must go to an arbitrator to decide it. We're not going to make the court system decide no-fault claims. As a result, you can see that while we were once the number 2 highest cost per claim, when it comes to defending a claim, it only costs us $1,766 every time we pick up that claim. To resolve it, our legal costs are that amount. But you can see that Michigan, again, in resounding first place, is almost $5,000 per claim. But what I think is also important to note, look at the numbers at the bottom of this list in Pennsylvania. $174 to defend a no-fault claim. And you'd say, why? How is this possible? It's possible because if you don't debate the actual rate that a provider's entitled to, and you don't create an incentive for abuse, no one disputes it, right? So that is the goal of today, is to talk about what is no fault. It breaks down into 2 components. In the most simplest terms, it comes down to medical necessity. Does somebody need the treatment? And what is the rate that these people need to get for reimbursement? And so a fee schedule eliminates almost both of these problems because you don't have to debate medical necessity. People aren't going to overtreat if the pot at the end of the rainbow is not significant enough for them to overtreat and abuse the system. Does that make sense? So if you're getting the same price for an MRI in the state of Michigan from a health insurer or workers' comp carrier as you are for a car insurer, nobody's going to abuse MRIs for car accident victims. But if you're going to pay somebody in an MRI facility 4 times the amount of health insurance or workers' comp, yeah, if I run an MRI facility, I'm going to be doing as many MRIs as I possibly can, right? So when you have a fee schedule, you eliminate the pot of gold, and therefore you don't have overutilization. Ongoing misconceptions. Well, before we get to that, I just want to summarize some startling numbers that I want to share with the committee. First is that with that 2019 reform law, we became the most required liability insurance in the country. So everybody now in the state of Michigan has to buy $50,000 worth of liability insurance. That's the highest in the United States of America. The reason why I bring that up is to answer that first fundamental question I said that I would provide an answer for. Why is your car insurance so expensive in Michigan? Well, number 1, you have to buy the most liability insurance in the country. That was passed in 2019. Number 2, how broken is the system right now? 40% of all of the judges and juries and courtrooms in the state of Michigan are no-fault disputes. That should shock you. Unless you're actually in a jury or call for jury duty, 40% of your docketed cases are not breach of contract. It's not somebody embezzling something. It's a no-fault dispute. They actually have a factory of what happens in these courtrooms because there's that many disputes of no fault. That's a definition of a defaulted system, a broken system. And again, 123% higher. The average claim in the state of Michigan is more than double New Jersey. And then going to my third question that I hope to answer at the end of this presentation is, why haven't we seen our rates go down as a result of this reform? This is constantly asked, right? This must be hoodwinked by all the insurance companies. They're just making money hand over foot. They're running around in their Porsches and all that other stuff. Well, the reality is that there's a couple of things that all of us would probably know if you had to buy a car in the last 3 years. We have a global supply chain shortage since COVID. So anybody who's trying to buy a new car right now, tell me if you can buy it for under the sticker price, okay? Tell me if you've seen your used car go up in value. Those things are not immune to the car insurance industry. We have shortages on supply, meaning parts. It takes months for us to fix those parts. The average cost to fix a car in the United States of America last year was 37% higher than it was prior to COVID. 37%. This is why Geico lost $4 billion in 12 months and why Progressive lost over $1.5 billion in the last 12 months. So when you say, well, why haven't our rates go down? You should be lucky that you're not living in the state of New Jersey or these other states that are actually going through massive rate increases to make up for these property damage supply chain shortages. If it wasn't for the reform in 2019, you'd be going through massive rate increases. You wouldn't be just complaining about not seeing large savings. You would actually be complaining about the fact that your rates went up 30%. So that is one thing that people should know, as well as a Supreme Court decision that was rendered this year that said that even though the law was passed in 2019, for people that were injured prior to 2019, we're not applying the fee schedule, okay? And that was a massive blow to the industry because that means all of those overtreatments, all the MRI costs, all the things that have to go to court that we showed you, the most expensive cost to defend a case in Michigan, all those things are still applying to anybody that was injured prior to 2019. So those are the overview. I'd like to just simplify what is being debated by the legislature right now. There are only two types of treatment that are right now going on that fit in one or two buckets. If you treat somebody in the state of Michigan for a car accident injury, 86% of the time that treatment will fit under a fee schedule. We don't have to debate it. It's 190% up to 250%, depending on if you're treating indigent patients in Detroit, for example. You'll get a higher reimbursement. To give you a perspective, most states in this country have workers' compensation fee schedules under 180%, okay? So the state of Michigan said, we think it's reasonable if we look at the rest of the United States that a provider will get 190 to 250% of what Medicare is. That 86% of those codes, everybody loves. The industry loves it. In my opinion, it's an efficient way of handling this because we've known this is tried and true for other states in workers' comp. This 14% is the troubling part that everybody seems to have a problem with. Whether it's the CPAN people that are testifying about catastrophically injured people or legislators that are concerned about the lack of care, it's the people that don't fit under that 86%. And that's because in the legislature in 2019, they said, well, what happens to a person that gets treated for something that Medicare doesn't recognize as something that should be reimbursed? And they said, okay, we've looked at the data. There's so much overcharging that we're going to give a 45% discount for whatever you were charging prior to 2019's law being passed. Because we've looked at the abuse, we've looked at the numbers, and we're just going to put this one huge discount, 45% off. And that's what you're going to have to get paid. That's the most you're going to get paid as a provider. And logically, if you think about it, that is a flawed decision, right? Because what if you had a reasonably charging provider in 2019 and they were treating an accident victim and now they're getting a 45% haircut, right? That is what is the debate. But what I want everybody, or I'm trying everybody to understand, is that catastrophically injured people that are testifying are not what the industry is worried about. What we're worried about is the fact that the legislation that's being proposed doesn't address just catastrophically injured people. And what I'm going to show you through these slides is that the vast majority of the people that get non-medical attendant care are people that are being written scripts by chiropractors, not by doctors that are orthopedics, not by doctors that are giving you neurosurgery scripts to say somebody needs non-medical attendant care. Nobody has a problem in the insurance industry about providing as much coverage as you need for catastrophically injured people, because as a mathematical fact, they comprise of 1% of all the no-fault claims are catastrophically injured people. So from the industry's perspective, no matter what you provide for those people, we're not going to have a significant pass along to drivers, right? But the problem is the current legislation has no such trigger. In the state of New Jersey, we were addressed with this same problem because I said in New Jersey, we passed the same law word for word 10 months before Michigan did. And so what they did in New Jersey was they said, what are we going to do with these catastrophically injured people? So when they passed the legislation to provide a new limit of $15,000 in New Jersey right now, you could buy a limit of $15,000 from unlimited all the way down to $250,000. They passed a law that said you can buy $15,000 worth of coverage. The state of New Jersey's legislature said, except for if you sell the $15,000, you got to give the state maximum coverage for catastrophically injured people. And they created a definition for what catastrophically injured people were. So there was no fraud. For example, treatment that starts at the accident scene. Nobody can argue that the catastrophically injured people that we're talking about or testifying were people that were injured at an accident scene. It's much easier to limit where we're talking about expanding coverage when you limit the amount of possible fraud, right? So we're not talking about chiropractors writing scripts to these people. So that's the first thing, is that there are loopholes. As I said before, the records indicate 1% of no-fault claims involve catastrophically injured people. The Senate bill proposed would increase costs by over $500 million in its current form. And those costs, as I said, will be passed along to drivers. And if you wanted to know whether or not we're going to go from the highest cost for car insurance, there's no higher than being number one, right? Like if you win the title, you can't get better than be the world champions, right? So when you're the world champions at the highest cost for car insurance, you can't get worse, right? If that's the notion of the legislatures, let's just increase by $500 million the cost for car insurance in Michigan, it's a great solution. The critical question is, I've had a hard time struggling with this. The statement that people that are catastrophically injured in car accidents should be treated differently than people that are catastrophically injured in Michigan from falling off a scaffolding or falling off. If you're a Medicare patient, if you're on Medicare in the state of Michigan, you're over 65 years old, and you get in a catastrophic injury, do you know that Medicare does not pay for non-medical attendant care? They just don't even pay for it. You know why? Because if you're catastrophically injured, Medicare would say you need medical attendant care, which requires a medically certified service to provide the attendant care that you need, right? So my argument all the time is, why are we creating a special treatment to car accident tragically injured people that if you fell in your house and fell down 15 flights of stairs, you would not get that treatment? Do we need to create a separate category? Then I think the legislature should make sure that everybody in Medicare somehow gets treated for some of the things that they're asking to be treated from. This is the best example of what we saw prior to the law. This is what carriers would have to be forced to pay or go to court, be billed $32,000 for a laminectomy that, based on 200% of Medicare, they're entitled to $2,506. And believe it or not, there are willing doctors that do laminectomies for $2,506 in the state of Michigan. But what happens when you don't have fee schedules on every single treatment is that you automatically go to court in the state of Michigan and you litigate it. And the attorneys are entitled to their reasonable trial fees or their attorney's fees or their defense fees for bringing that dispute to you. So at the end of the day, I thought I'd share with you guys some really cool forms. These are actual forms that we receive. This is over 60% of our non-medical attendant care scripts are written by chiropractors, okay? So I want to make this clear again. 60% of the non-medical attendant care requirements that they say you need to pay for this bill are written by chiropractors that deal with soft tissue injuries, okay? This is what we get as a form that says, hey, I certify this person needs homework. They need to have housework. They need somebody to come to your house from a chiropractor. Then we get a form that was actually designed by the trial bar that looks like this. It says, hi, I'm Joe Smith. I work to see Joanne Smith, and I looked over her and provided assistance in hygiene. That's the click mark. This is a form that just shows hours that they worked. And then they have a attestation that says, I expect to get paid. And guess what happens if we don't pay this? We go to court. And then we pay an average of $4,995 to defend whether or not a chiropractor should be able to write a script for non-medical attendant care and whether or not this person even performed any services that, if I was an employer, I would at least be able to say, what hours did you show up at Joe Smith's house? What did you actually perform when you say you, quote unquote, assisted with hygiene? Does that mean that you gave the person a brush to comb their hair? What does that actually mean? This is important because the legislature is under this notion that these bills are just for catastrophically injured people. The abuse is not in catastrophically injured people. No one has a problem with that. So what I want to hurry to, because I know that I'm limited in time here, is to talk about really the primary factors of why the rates aren't just going to hit everybody uniformly. If you look at territories like Detroit, there is data that allows insurance companies, this is data driven, okay, to allow us to charge 320% more for somebody who lives in Detroit as opposed to the statewide average. So if my coverage costs $1,000 statewide on my average, if you live in Detroit, I get to charge you $3,200 if that was my statewide average, right? So I use this because I want everybody to understand that when we talk about the average rate, oh, it's $100, it really isn't just $100 for the people that live in Detroit. The second component is, you know, my industry doesn't like me talking about this, but is the use of credit scores. If you have a sub 600 credit score, you're likely to pay 2 times the amount of somebody who has an above 700 credit score. So when you look at urban areas like Detroit, where 19% of the population is currently on Medicaid, you can see why, if you think that the average rate for $100 is going to be uniform for people in urban areas in this state, it is not going to be uniform because they live in much higher relativities, or multipliers is what we call them. So, proposed solutions. We talk about this in New Jersey. We have this thing called pre-certification. If you ever actually, if people in this room have health insurance, I'm sure you had it. If you wanted to go get a surgery, you got to get pre-authorization from your health insurer. That doesn't exist with car insurers. Like I said, in the state of Michigan, we create a no-fault system that makes us a health insurer, but they don't give us the ammunition to be able to do what health insurers do. We don't get to pre-certify anything in the state of Michigan. But in the state of New Jersey, we have a pre-certification protocol. If we don't answer somebody who's requesting to treat a patient in the state of New Jersey, within 72 hours, it's deemed approved. So there are penalties for people that don't follow these protocols in the state of New Jersey, but that would be helpful to curbing the abuse. The part that I think we're all debating about here twofold. Number one is, what about the 14%? What we would suggest, what happens right now in Michigan, is that if you have a treatment that does not fit in that fee schedule, we would suggest that you use Fair Health Paid Database, or a national database that aggregates what providers are accepting as payments right now in that region in Michigan for that exact treatment. Let's not create fake fee schedules. Let's create ones that are based upon real data. Ultimately, if I leave you with one thing from this presentation, is my implorement for this entire legislature to consider, if you want to address the catastrophically injured people, please adopt language that requires the person to be catastrophically injured. Nobody from the industry will ever debate that. We want to take care of the tragically injured people. There's nobody that's saying that we shouldn't. We're just asking that there aren't bills that are money grabs for certain people in this state that will cost people in Detroit unaffordable rates. So adopt the language we will propose that is the same as New Jersey. Wage loss, these are just things that I'm going to say off the top of my head so you guys can ask later, but the problem in the state of Michigan as well is wage loss. You have the largest wage loss in the United States of America. So if somebody gets in a car accident and they say, I can't work, okay? In other states, it says, well, you got to go to disability through the state first before you go to your car insurer. In Michigan, it's absolutely the opposite. We're the primary wage loss provider. That's number one. Number two, it provides 3 years of wage loss for a person. And number three, it says that you don't even need to be employed at the time that the accident occurred. So we actually get letters from people that say, hey, Joe Smith got in an accident on Monday. I just want to let you know he was going to work for my dry cleaning company on Tuesday, even though he wasn't employed for 10 years. On Tuesday, he was going to work for me full-time at the wage of $50,000 a year. That's adequate proof to say I'm entitled to provide that person wage loss for 3 years, okay? So wage loss is a problem in the state of Michigan. The 15%, this might shock people, but 15% of our total costs for no fault are paid to chiropractors in the state of Michigan. Why? Because there is no daily maximum cap in the state of Michigan for what chiros can bill you for. So in New Jersey, they said the Department of Insurance needs to come up with what the daily maximum that a chiro can bill for an insurance company. That number is $105 a day. It is common for us to get bills for over $700 from a chiropractor in a day, doing manipulations to different regions of people's back all in one day. So if we put a daily maximum cap on chiropractic bills, we would curb a lot of the costs dealing with no fault. Care paths and pre-certifications I talked about, there's a need for a stronger legislation on us going after people that commit fraud in this state. When you commit insurance fraud, there should be stiff penalties in this state. There are almost none. If you were to compare the state of Michigan to other states in this country, it's like they fell asleep at the wheel when it comes to insurance fraud. And last but not least, require appeals to go to DIFs. Right now, the new law says that you can go to the Department of Insurance to show their expert opinion of whether or not the rate or the denial was good or bad. Right now, that's an option. We would suggest that to be mandatory before they go to a lawsuit. And our estimates, if you were to adopt all these proposed solutions, were that we would reduce the cost of the system by about $1.4 billion, which is about 65% of the cost of no fault, if all of these things were adopted. And I know that's a heavy lift. But I know I've talked very fast, and I would welcome questions. I know I had a time limit, so I'm really good at speeding up my testimony.
Well, thank you, Mr. Poe. I really appreciate your presentation. I want to just clarify personally some points of mine. Okay, first of all, you said that the industry, and I'm assuming this is the insurance industry, have no problem taking care of those who are catastrophically injured as the definition of being truly catastrophically injured. Is that correct?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. And I also heard you say something that, and I wasn't going to go into this, and I'm not going to go into this, but if costs are raised, how would it be recovered? I guess I'm not phrasing this right. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, basically is who bears the cost, right?
Who bears?
If you raise the cost by $500 million like the Senate bill proposes, who bears the cost is obviously our driver. We just pass it along. We're statutorily allowed by law to increase our rates to cover for our losses. So ultimately, every in this room, you're just going to pay the $500 million, right? But as I said, depending on where you live, if you live in a rural area of Michigan, where your relativity, meaning your multiplier for living in that area where you only see trees and you're hunting all the time, maybe that cost will be 1/4 of the cost of somebody in Detroit or somebody in Grand Rapids.
Okay, and follow up, and then I'm going to pass it on to my colleagues, and there were several of them have questions. You mentioned Detroit, okay, and how many uninsured, estimate, ballpark, how many people would this put into the underinsured or uninsured, when I'm understanding that you saying you're going to take care of people who qualify, like the young man that was here, that definitely needs the service, but how, at that scale that I'm seeing, how many people will be driving around uninsured or underinsured, and which demographic would it affect the most?
Well, it would affect the most, obviously, the people who have the lowest income, right? Because people don't understand this, but the second highest component of your credit score is your credit utilization. It has nothing to do with whether you pay bills on time. Like this notion that credit scores are, just because you're poor, you can pay your bills on time. Well, that's 40% of your FICO score. 30% of your FICO score is how much of your available credit that's been granted to you is actually being used for revolving debt. When you're poor, you use 100% of that number, okay? You look at it as like free money. Somebody gives you a new credit line and a credit card, you use 100% of it to pay for groceries, et cetera. So we've seen as an industry that 250,000 drivers in the last 2 years who previously could not afford car insurance are now buying car insurance. 60% of all the drivers that buy Cure Auto Insurance were previously uninsured. So when we came into the market and we talked to Mayor Duggan, he told me that 65% of the drivers in Detroit were lying about where they live or drive without insurance. That has changed, and it has changed people's lives. I've sat there. I've actually witnessed firsthand how much this makes in somebody's life. Because believe it or not, people want to abide by the law. They don't want to drive dirty. No one wants – I always laugh about this because we talk about the uninsured motorist rate in every state. Nobody ever gets a car insurance bill in the mail and goes, this bill's not that important to pay. We don't really care about this bill. This one's with the doctors and the other people that we don't want to pay. Car insurance is a bill that you're worried that when you get pulled over for speeding or you get in a car accident, you don't have insurance, you're actually going to probably face a fine or lose your license. So this is not by choice. I look at uninsured motorist rate as a reflection of affordability. That's the bottom line. So Detroiters would probably be hurt the worst.
Just pausing there. Rep. Grant.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. I will keep this quick. Well, I'll just move quickly if you can flow with me so I don't take a lot of time. So first, you just made a statement that a lot more people are buying car insurance. But I believe there's a difference between buying car insurance and having insurance that will actually cover your needs if you happen to need it. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. The next thing. So really glad to hear that you guys are willing to cover people with catastrophic injuries. That's a high importance for me. Can you explain to me then why I am personally meeting, seeing, knowing, not just this year, but over the several years, even before auto no-fault reform, so many catastrophically injured people who are not getting their services covered. We've seen so many businesses go out of business because billing was delayed, and it was months and months and months before those injuries where you can look at the individual and see that they have a catastrophic injury is not being covered. If that wasn't the qualm here, why were they not being assisted?
Well, there's a lot of articles and debates about some of these news articles that said some providers were going to go out of business, and 2 years later they're actually expanding, and actually you go to their websites and they're hiring people. So I don't know what, unfortunately I haven't had the opportunity to meet with the people that you're talking about, so I can't comment regarding those people. All I can say is that in the state of Michigan, as I've shown you on these illustrations, has the most coverage of any state in the United States of America,
that wasn't
undeniable.
I'm sorry, we're short on time, so I want to stay focused. So you're saying providers haven't gone out of business?
I have not seen them.
And just to clarify, because you seem like a data man, so I just want to share something with you. Some of the largest providers, Spectrum Health, which is now Corewell, other people, stopped doing home health care because it was no longer feasible for them, even though they're a hospital and they know that these clients are coming there because they hit them in the ER first. So just, you can look into that, but I just wanted to state that. Then also, so understand the chiropractor piece, because I've been to the chiropractor, so I understand, like, they technically can't write scripts, official scripts. But I have also and hopefully you will if you haven't, met with a lot of physical therapists who, I have this exact example, they're being threatened of being pushed out of service or being put out of business if they give scripts for what they believe their client needs. So the insurance that a client may have, and these are exact numbers, may cover 60 visits, because someone with a catastrophic injury, you don't just come a few times and we put you back together, but you need ongoing care to function in your daily life. So it may cover the 60 visits, but they're capping people at 12, because if I bill you more than that, I'm going to be punished or put out of business. So what do you say for those physical therapists who have done a lot of education and a lot of time in their career?
So I would say again that we have a wonderful system in Michigan. You can make up one of the 40% of all the docketed cases in the state of Michigan to dispute that if you're denied and you think you're entitled to, you get to sue the insurance company, of which we pay an average of $5,000 every time.
Okay.
So the notion that they're denied and they don't have recourse, I don't believe it. They can actually sue us, which they do.
Okay, thank you. It's hard for a catastrophically injured person to do that, but
No, the providers sue us,
The last
actually.
thing that I have, I know you were saying that you would love other industries, other people are allowed a pre-approval before a service is rendered. A lot of people would say that the MCCA is that pre-approval point because they do slow down processes, and MCCA was here and did kind of say that they do that, they pre-approve services. Is that not working well, or?
So the MCCA doesn't even kick in until over $500,000 is being paid out. So the pre-qualification
And there's a
through the
little
state
debate on
MCCA
that.
fund. So what I'm saying is there is no, when you talk about what MCCA does to pre-certify treatment, that's after $500,000 is exhausted out of coverage, because nothing gets covered from the MCCA until $500,000 has been paid out.
Thank
So,
you.
there
And
you go.
also, this is the last thing, and it's just a statement. Looking at some of these cases, I see that $500,000 can be covered and paid out on an ER visit if it's really a catastrophic injury. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rev. Grant. Minority Vice Chair Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. I think it's, at least for me, I know it's been insightful kind of seeing some state comparisons, and maybe there's some things that we need to look at out of state and compare what we can do to save people across Michigan money and still make sure that our catastrophic people are taken care of. So I come from the law enforcement world, so the fraud thing is pretty heavy on my mind. So we know that theft and fraud drives up cost in every industry, not just the insurance industry. So do you think, because we just introduced a fraud package not too long ago that deals with some of this, but do you think getting that under control and getting the bad actors under control would dramatically affect rates?
Yes. I think the abuse makes up such a large portion of this. We just don't have ammunition. In the state of New Jersey, we have what's called the Insurance Fraud Prevention Act that was passed because of the abuse of the no-fault system. And if you're found to be guilty of committing fraud by creating a material omission or misstatement to get benefits from an insurance company, you're required to pay treble damages, which is 3 times the amount that you robbed us of. I'm sorry, but that robbing is also really robbing the people that buy car insurance, right? Because it's not really the carrier, it's really the people that are paying higher rates because of the fraud. So yes, 100%. We're desperate need in the state of Michigan to deal with those types of fraudulent actors.
Thank you.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you. I'll start out with the positive. I agree with you on a couple things. One, your reference to the credit scores, and that is an ongoing issue with rate setting. And the other piece I think we both agree on is that a fee schedule needs to be in place, correct?
Yes.
I appreciate that. A lot has been stated about, we just referenced fraud again. I do want to point out in the 2019 legislation with auto no-fault reform, fraud was a central pillar to that. So it's interesting to see how that is being addressed. And I think there have been improved safeguards since that 2019 law was in place. The question I have for you is, you had the comment specifically on the Senate bills that they would raise costs by $500 million. Could you specify exactly how?
Sure. So, number one, the floor as we speak here today, every car insurer pays 190% of Medicare. The Senate bill increases that floor by 10%. So if you just sheerly take the numbers of what we pay, remember, 86% of all treatment falls under a fee schedule. We're just increasing a raise. We're giving everybody a 10% raise, right? That's number one, calculated to be I actually don't have the numbers on me, but I did this for Senator Kavanaugh. She had asked for how did we come up with the numbers that we're talking about. The second part is that the current litigation percentage, so every single no-fault claim we have in Michigan right now, there's a 39% chance that that bill that we get is going to go to a lawsuit. In the state of New Jersey, that's 13%, okay? So the 14% right now that fit under this 45% discount that everybody seems to have a problem with, right? At least right now, it's not debated. That is a 45% discount whether you like it or not, right? That was the 2019 law. This current Senate bill basically says anything that's not on the fee schedule, you can sue an insurance company. The cost will go from $5,000 on average significantly, so we've estimated that number. And not only that, the problem is there's absolutely no way for us to gauge how much of the non-attendant care that right now in that current bill says that a non-medically trained person can make $114,000 a year under that Senate bill. Under that Senate bill, it says that a nurse can get paid $284,000 a year under that Senate bill. I don't know about you, but if you go to salary.com, a nurse in the state of Michigan gets paid an average of $53,000 a year. But under the no-fault bill in the Senate, you get $284,000.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly address the lawsuit piece. So I think a piece of the increase in lawsuits since 2019 has been because insurance companies started applying a law retroactively. We all know in Michigan, laws are not applied retroactively. They're prospective, right? We pass a law, the governor signs it, it's moving forward. So I think that's a piece of the litigation that you've seen increased in the last 3 to 4 years is because of that. And so after the Andary, I'm waiting to see over the next year after the Andary decision settled that you can't apply the 2019 law retroactively. I expect that to level out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rep. Rogers. And we only have time for 2 more questions. Mr. Poe, if it's okay, like we've done with so many other presentations, the committee, if you have additional questions, we can get them to Mr. Poe, or we can have you come back, because as you can see, I've invited CPAN back. If you're willing to come back,
Always.
I'd love to have you come back as well. Representative Brazat and then Representative Breen, we got to keep in mind the time. We have sessions starting at 10. Representative Brazat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great presentation.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. One of the most informative ones that I've seen so far. Madam Chair, thank you for bringing Mr. Poe in. You've cleared up a few issues. Rep. Grant had some great questions that I had. So these guys all stole my questions, Madam Chair. So I'd appreciate it next time if I could go first.
Well,
But I will say the fraud issue being law enforcement is a number one issue, like Rep. Harris said. And then the catastrophic brain injury. This is the first time I've ever heard anybody say they want to take care of the catastrophic brain injury people. And that's been my focus. That's been my number one complaint, is that they made it retroactive, which was horrendous as far as I can see. So I look forward to working with you. And
Thank you.
In closing, Madam Chair, I'd like to remind Mr. Poe that Tom Brady won 7 Super Bowls, not 3.
Thank you.
thank you. And on Zoom, Representative Breen. Is she still with us?
I'm here. Sorry,
Okay.
technical issues.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I'm going to be quick, and thank you so much to the everybody from Cure Insurance. I am also a lawyer. I'll keep this quick by just asking some yes or no questions. I'm very familiar with the forms, the doctors, everything involving no fault, and I'm thrilled that you agree that we should have a fee schedule. And it's my understanding, though, that what people charge, what physicians, providers charge, though, that is not what you actually pay, correct?
Correct.
It's either a fee schedule or you pay the usual and customary rates. Okay. And you've also talked about the increased claim costs. And I think we can all agree, though, that claim costs wouldn't be so high if there wasn't an unusual amount of delayed, denied claims. If a lot of claims that were just automatically sent to the insurance companies, claim costs overall would go down if those litigation costs went down. Is that correct?
No, I mean, I can't agree with that statement as broad as it is. I mean, I'll just say this much. In what I didn't get to touch upon is in the state of Michigan, you have 364 days to send us a bill or even notify us that you're treating you. Do you guys have a health insurance carrier in this room that allows you to send a bill as a provider 364 days after they start treating them? That's what happens. So if you're talking about delays, the common delays are the car insurers not getting a bill or a treatment plan from a physician. There's 364 days before we get a lot of the notification. How do we actually prove that somebody medically needs something 364 days after that treatment? So the notion that insurance companies are delaying it.
I have to disagree with that because,
Okay.
and just to be clear, I've done both plaintiff
yes, we gonna have
and a lot of defense work. I know that most claims are sent within 30 days.
Excuse me,
Most of them.
Representative Breen and Mr. Poe, I'm so sorry, but session begins for this committee in 5 minutes. So Representative Breen, if you and Mr. Poe would like to get together, and we will bring the resolve of their discussion back before the entire committee so you guys can hear this conversation. But we have to, with
Thank
the
you.
time we have left. So, Mr. Poe, thank you for your
Thank you.
presentation. We need a motion. Do we have any absent members? Which one?
Marketing.
Okay, we need a motion to excuse Rep. Marketing. Rep. Harris excuses Rep. Marketing. Let's see. Hearing no objections, Rep. Marketing is excused. Seeing no further business before the committee, the Insurance and Financial Services Committee is adjourned.